As our team is exiting the stage, would you join me in prayer before we dive in? Father, we thank you for just the ability to be in this space together. Based on how some of our weeks went, it is not easy to navigate the ups and downs and highs and lows and things that we encounter through a given week, but you've brought us here in this space. And we ask that in what time remains that you would capture our attention, that you would speak to us, that we could hear your voice, and that you would give us what we most needed today, even if we didn't know what we needed, but that you would. And so in advance, we will give you thanks because you're a good God. And we trust you with our lives. In Christ we pray. Amen. 14,000 children in the world die every day due to starvation, hunger, or other preventable diseases. Wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and earthquakes ravage our world, leaving tens of thousands dead in their wake every year. School shootings, terrorist bombings, and other random violence leave us, so many of us, brokenhearted, asking the age-old questions, why? Why does this happen to good and innocent people? And where is God in all of this? Welcome today to the dark night of the soul. It may not be what you were expecting, but for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be looking at the book of Job and trying to learn some lessons that would be helpful for us as we live our lives and engage pain and suffering, some of us on a daily basis. Now, before I have Jaden come, he's going to read chapter 1, the first 12 verses, to get us started in this series. I want to ask you some questions. This is where I'm inviting some feedback, some interaction, just to know that, number one, you're awake. But number two, that there's an opportunity for you to share what you know, because some of you know a lot. And I think together, as we read scriptures, it's always really significant to get input. I'm one of those kind of people who likes the dialogue, the back and forth, not the straight monologue. So as we're getting started, just a few things about Job. How many of you, show of hands, have ever read the book? How many of you have heard of the book? Hearing about it is much easier than reading it. Job is a very difficult book to read. It's 42 chapters. The first 2 chapters are narrative. The last chapter, part of the last chapter, is narrative, and in between is all poetry. And so when we look at this book, it falls into a certain category. Now, this is important, I think, as we move forward in understanding what we're reading. Job is not historical. It's not like Kings and Chronicles. It is poetry. It is part of the wisdom collection. There are 5 books in the Bible that are part of the wisdom genre. This is one. Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. 5 books. So it's important for us as we're getting started to know what kind of literature it is, what kind of genre we're reading, so that we don't confuse things. Okay, so many of you have read the book. Does anybody know who wrote it? Neither does anybody else. So you didn't lose on that because it's totally anonymous. Nobody has any idea who wrote it. Okay, does anybody know when it was written? You guys read this book, right? Neither does anybody else. Nobody else really knows when it was written. Somewhere between the 2nd century and the 6th century BC. So there's a lot of space that theologians will sort of go back and forth on why they think. But again, it's not historical, so there's no dates in there that you can find that gives you a hint. So we don't know who wrote it. We're not sure when it was written. We know what genre of literature it is. Does anybody know what the book is about? If you were going to be asked, what is a summary, a 1-sentence summary that you could give me because I haven't read the book of Job, and somebody's asking you, and you have read the book of Job, what is the book about? Anybody have any guesses or want to tell us what the book of Job is about? Okay. Suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? Yielding. Yeah, Natasha. We'll get to the well-intentioned friends, but yeah. Sometimes it's good just to be quiet. Yeah, Cynthia. Okay, so it's about a good guy who had a lot but was tested. Okay. Maureen? It's about faith. Okay. Patience. You'll oftentimes hear people say, you have the patience of Job. Job had patience, sort of. He did. There were parts of the story that reveal that. There are other parts that reveal he's not perfect, right? I would say if I were to summarize it, I would say that the book of Job is about the problem of evil and the justice of God. The problem of evil and the justice of God. So before we dive in and I unpack this first part of chapter 1, I want to invite my good friend Jaden. Come on up, Jaden. Last week you saw his brother perform and did such an incredible job. And now young bro is going to come and share with you the first 12 verses of chapter 1 of Job. It's up on the screens if you don't have a Bible.
Thank you. Good morning, Grace. So I'll be reading Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. There once was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uzi. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God and stayed away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in the entire area. Job's sons would take turns preparing feasts in their homes, and they would also invite their 3 sisters to celebrate with them. When these celebrations ended, sometimes, after several days, Job would purify his children. He would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt offering for each of them. For Job said to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and have cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular practice. One day, the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord. The accuser, Satan, came with them. "Where have you come from?" the Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, "I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on." Then the Lord asked Satan, "Have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil." Satan replied to the Lord, "Yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his properties. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is, but reach out and take everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." "All right, you may test him," the Lord said to Satan. "Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but do not harm him physically." So Satan left the Lord's presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaden. So from jump, we're introduced to a guy named Job, and we learn some things about him. So just in listening to it, if you had never heard it before, what did you learn about Job? He's rich. He has great wealth. He has lots of kids. He has a great family. Yeah, Jaden? He's living a good life. He's faithful. He's a man of integrity. So we learn these things about Job when we first open the book. Things are going good in Job's life. Now, After verse 6, things take a quick shift. You get kind of a biography in the first 6 verses, but after that, there's a shifting to this sort of heavenly council meeting where Yahweh, the Lord, is meeting with some angelic beings. Now, we don't know what the meeting is about, but we do know that the meeting is very rudely interrupted by whom? Satan. Now, I'm going to blow your mind for those of you guys who know anything about this story, okay? Be prepared. Now, this character named Satan is not the Satan that we know from the rest of the scriptures. How do I know that? Well, if you were to read this story in its original Hebrew, you would discover that this character is called not just Satan, but there is a general article in front, H-A, Satan. It's called Ha-Satan, okay? Ha-Satan, not Satan. And every time that Ha-Satan makes his presence known in the story of Job, it is preceded by that article. So when Jaden was reading it, it was transposed into English where all you heard was Satan. But if you read it in the Hebrew, it would be Ha-Satan. Now in the Hebrew, you never put a definite article in front of a personal name. So the article is understood to be the office or the function of the designated individual. Ha-Satan literally means, does anybody know what it means? You probably didn't know that it was Ha-Satan rather than Satan. Ha-Satan means the accuser or the challenger, okay? Or sometimes referred to as the adversary. He is not an evil force. There is no tempting, there is no deception, there is no corruption. Later in the New Testament, Satan, without the ha, will be depicted as a liar, a deceiver, and one who wants to steal, kill, and destroy. But you don't see that here in this story at all. They're not the same character. Okay? What kind of literature is this? It's wisdom literature. And mostly this story is poetry. There's a narrative that bookends the poetry. We're introduced to a character that is different from the Satan that you and I, most of us, are familiar with. It's Ha-Satan. He's not a deceiver. He's not an evil force. He plays more the role of kind of a prosecuting attorney who comes in. God makes these claims about Job, and Ha-Satan comes in, and he is going to cross-examine because he doesn't believe that what God says about Job is actually true. Now, God asks him as he interrupts the meeting, he says, Ha-Satan, where have you been? And Ha-Satan says, well, I've been here, there, everywhere. I've been roaming around, checking out the scene. I'm a little bit of every place. And he said, well, in your travels of going here, there, and everywhere, have you seen my man Job? And he goes on and on about his servant Job. He says he's the finest man in all the earth. He's a man of complete integrity. He fears God. He stays away from evil. He basically is practically perfect in almost every way. And Ha-Satan says, you know what? I have seen him. But he's not as good as you think he is. The only reason that you think he's so good is because you've given him such a cushy life. If you take away all the stuff that you've given him, you're going to find out what kind of person he really is. And what Ha-Satan is getting at is there was this common belief in their day known as what is the retribution principle, which states this: you get what you deserve. Now, today we hear this sort of principle, and we would call it what? We have a name for it? Karma. Karma, by the way, is not really a Christian principle. Some of us throw it around as if it is. It's more Hindu in its origins. But the idea, as you're listening to this story, Ha-Satan is basically saying he's a believer in karma. You get what you deserve. The only reason the dude's so good is you've given him everything. Of course he's going to be good. So God says, okay, we'll just see about that. And he allows Ha-Satan to do whatever he wants to Job, with the only one caveat, and that is you can't touch him personally. Do whatever you want, take whatever you want, but don't touch him personally. And so, he tests Job in ways that few others have ever been tested in their life. And one catastrophe after another, Job loses everything. In a matter of moments, all of his possessions, all of his property, his livelihood, even his children are gone. Now, some of us have had bad days, like really, really bad days. I think Job sort of takes a bad day to a next level, right? He has lost everything. But remember, Job has done nothing to deserve this. He's done nothing wrong. Even though this common principle that most people believed in this day said, if bad happens to you, it happened because you deserve it. Job has done nothing wrong. And so when Job gets these reports, one after another, of all he had lost, did you pay attention to what his actions were? What is it that Job did in response to the terrible situations that befell him? And in this spot, as you're paying attention to Job, I want you to pay attention to what might happen to you. Now, listen, it's very difficult for us to put ourselves in Job's place. Even those of us who have had the most difficult and trying of lives, it's difficult to put ourselves in Job's place. But let's just put ourselves in our own place on our worst days. Let's just leave it at that. On your worst day, when something terrible has befallen you, can you remember, can you bring back to your memory how it is that you responded when bad news after bad news after bad news arrived? I want you to think about what you did, and then I want you to think about what you see Job do. Okay? Clearly in your mind after a really, really bad day? All right, just for a moment, talk with me about your responses, if you're willing to be that vulnerable. Now, you may need to edit some of that, but on your worst day, after the most difficult news, in the most painful place, can you remember how it was that you responded? That you be willing to share. Joseph.
Questioning God seriously.
Okay, serious questioning of God. Cynthia.
I shut down, I freeze, I go to sleep.
Yeah.
I tuck myself in bed, and I can't think, I shut it off.
Yeah. You isolate, you pull the covers over your head.
Okay, up, I'm like, I don't want to be awake.
Yeah.
I can't handle this.
Gotcha. You shut down. Marlene. Yeah, you question whether it's God or yourself. Why even bother? Why do I continue even to get up out of the bed? Yeah, Jay. Self-medicate. We numb the pain. It's an easy go-to. Anybody else? Jaden. You ignore it. You try to put it out of your mind. You distract yourself with a number of other things. Yeah, we use a lot of things when we're dealing with very difficult times to sort of distract ourselves or numb ourselves or deal with our pain. Anybody else? Yeah, Amari. So similar to what people in Job are thinking, if something went wrong, I must have done something. It must be something I did. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Linda.
I know I went into shock. It was like a natural defense, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, shock and disbelief. Yeah, Keisha. So in that space of your deep pain, you may have questions, but like there was some place of just acceptance. Okay. I always know that in the hard spaces, there's a version of Vincent that I want to emerge, and then there's the real Vincent. And sometimes on a good day, they're not that far apart, but sometimes the person I want to be and the person I am are miles away. And so it just depends. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all of your input. I want you to see what Job did, and then I want us to just, we're almost sort of in the home stretch here. I want you to just think about what you might learn from Job's response as you move forward in your life and navigate some difficult days. I pray that you never have another difficult day in your life, right? But I know, being human, that that's not going to occur. So since it's going to happen, we might as well try and find wisdom where there is some to be found, and then make some application, because I think there's one or two things that are really important to learn from Job here. So Job gets up, he tears his robe in grief. This is a sign, this is an act of mourning. He shaves his head and he falls to the ground in worship, and he says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will be when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away." Now, this is an important principle, too, as we go along in this story. At this time, when this was written, there was an understanding. There was no, the real Satan that we talk about later, who we sort of give responsibility to bad things happening. There is no concept of this Satan at the point in which this was written. At the point in which this is written, the Israelites believe that good and bad, everything comes from God. There is no dualism at this point. There is no back and forth between good and evil. Everything comes from the hand of God, and you see that revealed through these words that Job says. He says, "I came from my mother's womb naked, and naked I will be when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away." And then he says, "Praise the name of the Lord," which is a stretch for me if I've put myself in his position. But in all of this, it says, Job did not sin by blaming God. What can we learn from Job, even if we can't get there just yet? Right? Even if we can't get to the place where we are worshiping and praising God for the terrible calamities that have befallen us, I think there are a couple things that we can take. Number one, I think Job is incredibly honest. And in his honesty, he gives himself permission to feel the full weight of his emotions, to grieve his loss, which is healthy, I think, because when you have a theology that doesn't allow you to feel, you have an empty and worthless theology. And also, when you buy into this kind of thinking, it does something to diminish your humanity. I see so many people who have experienced such difficult situations, who suffer for a variety of different reasons. Addiction and mental health challenges, severe losses, deep sicknesses that can't be healed. I find people in various states of grace and disgrace, but mostly when I engage in conversation, there is this sense for a lot of people that when you ask them how they're doing, that their most immediate response is, "I'm good." And it's almost as if you're living in some kind of fake or alternate reality where the worst that can happen to you puts you in a place where when somebody asks you to be honest, you can't be honest. We so deny death and suffering on a daily basis that we dress up people when they die and open coffins where we put the best clothing on them and makeup on them and say to one another, "Don't they look good?" What empty theology and what devastation to our humanity exists when we have to lie and pretend that things aren't as bad as what they are. They're bad. When you lose someone that you love, it hurts. It's okay to say so. It's okay to be honest and feel your pain. It's okay to rip your robe, to shave your head, metaphorically, to do the things that allow you to say, this sucks, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I think the first thing that Job teaches us is that it's important to be honest, not to numb ourselves, not to distract ourselves, and not to turn away from God in the time that we most need God to be present to us. Job leaves us in a true reality where we can be honest about how we're doing and not pretend that things are better than what they really are. And Job also teaches us that when we're in pain, that we can reach for God to meet us in this space, because truth be told, when all of us experience pain, we're going to reach for something. You know this if you're honest with yourself, that when you're hurting, when you're in a difficult space, when you're experiencing pain that is overwhelming, you're going to reach for something. You might as well reach for God. Because in that space, something supernatural has the capacity to not only transform your life, but change your view about what it means to be honest and real and human and alive. We need to be careful for what we reach for when we're experiencing pain, because not everything brings healing. If we can gather our senses enough to be honest about our pain and reach for the things that bring us health and hope and life, that is what we can learn from Job. I want to give you permission when you're feeling lousy to say so. I want to give you permission, according to Job, to allow it to take however long it takes to work it through. Sometimes we think, well, it's been a week, you should be better now. No. If you are, awesome. But if you're not, let it take as long as it takes, but stop faking or pretending that it's better than what it is. Now, when we're walking down, this aisle or the hallway, or we pass and we ask one another how we're doing, and a lot of times we say we're good when we're not, most of the time we're just saying hello. Right? Most people aren't asking you to tell them your life story and all that's going on. But when you have a captive audience and you know that somebody's asking because they care, you should really appreciate that and actually be honest. Because in that moment, you will know the difference between hello and you don't seem well. What's going on? How can I help? I want to give you permission to be honest with yourself and to be honest with each other. I want to give you permission when you're in the space to reach for God. There have been so many times over the course of my life where I've done the exact opposite. I've turned away from God, not towards. And it's only deepened the isolation that I've felt. If you can meet God in the space where He meets you in the place of your deepest need, healing will occur in the short term and in the long term. Now's not a time to give up your hope. It's to be honest and to be real and to share what's going on and to reach for God. Earlier in our service, when I was talking to you about what you do when you're having your very worst, no good, terrible, very bad day, when things are not as you want them to be, and I ask you to sort of draw that back to your attention and think about what it is that you do. Put yourself back in that space for just a moment about what you did. And think about what you reached for and if it helped you or it hurt you. Because if you reach for things that hurt you, it delays healing and it increases the possibility that rather than transformation, deformation is going to occur. As we're jumping into this story, I want you to be able to put yourself in a position where you can learn some important lessons, because life is hard. And all of us will experience pain and suffering. There are no exceptions. So since we're going to walk that way, maybe there's some things we can learn. And today we begin by being honest with ourselves. And instead of reaching to numb our pain, instead of reaching for something that isn't real, instead of trying to distract ourselves and busy ourselves and put ourselves in a position where we don't have to deal with the pain that is real, we might as well just move towards it rather than away. And we might as well just invite God into that space as well. Whether or not we can see God's hand in it yet or not, stay true to the possibility that God can meet you in that space and take you from that space into a new one, whether it takes a day, a week, a month, or a lifetime. Okay? We're going to journey with Job. Next week we're going to travel and see what it means to be a good friend and a bad friend. Our pain and our suffering isolates us by nature, but we can't let it. If you're one who tends to isolate when things go bad, next week will be important for you to come back and listen and learn. Because there's things that good friends can do when you're in pain, and there are things that good friends definitely shouldn't do. And we're going to learn a little bit about both. Okay, let's pray.